Wes Craven's 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street. Quite a few people had told me how good they thought this 4K disc was, and so it was no surprise for me to see such a fine grain 1.85:1 aspect ratio 35mm. And before I forget to say it later, this one runs for 91 minutes. Yes, A Nightmare on Elm Street on 4K is very good indeed. So good, in fact, I think it might actually be up there with a recent 88 films release of the Amityville Horror. However, perhaps not quite, but Nightmare on Elm Street does have nice muted colours, and this seems to give it an overall more filmic look than the Amityville Horror. So you'll have to be the judge of which one is better. I think it's close. They're both exceptionally good. There are a few soft focus scenes throughout A Nightmare on Elm Street, and these appear to be caused by opticals, whereby one scene is faded into the next. You get into the next scene assuming it's not a fade, and full sharpness is restored. The sound is now Dolby Atmos, but for the purists out there who would prefer to see A Nightmare on Elm Street with the original cinema sound, the original mono sound is there via a menu option. The extra features, as far as I could tell, there was nothing new. One of them did run for almost an hour, I think, and I've yet to get all the way through that. But these extras did educate me about this film being New Line Cinema's first big success, and that of course ultimately would lead on to other big successes such as Seven and the Lord of the Rings films. It had an estimated budget of $1.8 million and grossed at the worldwide box office just short of $25.7 million. However, this appears to be only just a bit more than the USA and Canada gross, so perhaps these figures aren't accurate, or possibly A Nightmare on Elm Street did not do well at the international box office, just more on the home market. And perhaps that concurs with what I experienced, because I went to see this film at the Leicester Square Theatre in 1985, and it was an early evening showing on a Monday, which was half-price night, so I got into that great cinema for just £2, can you believe it? It doesn't seem that long ago to me either. But anyway, I was in there. There were about half a dozen other people in the top tier of that auditorium with me. So I was in the circle, hardly anyone else around. This rather scary film unfolds in front of me. By that time, nothing really scared me, but I have to admit, it felt a bit uneasy being in that great cinema, that huge auditorium, that creepy auditorium, just me and Freddy Krueger. But I suppose that's understandable, really. Sadly, a hotel now stands where the Leicester Square Theatre once did. There's a hole-in-the-ground cinema to replace it, but all the fabulous history of the Leicester Square Theatre is now gone. It was later in its life split into two screens and became known as the Odeon West End, which retained the history, and the lobby bar area downstairs displayed photos of many of the great premieres held there, which let us all know we were seeing a film in a special cinema. The Odeon Leicester Square still survives though, but sadly other great cinemas are still closing, with the Odeon Shaftesbury Avenue being the latest it seems. Let's hope for the best there. This is where I saw Dances with Wolves, Blade Runner, The Abyss and other great films, so I find it particularly sad. Just along from the Odeon and next door to Forbidden Planet is the DIY store that opened about 25 years ago and still survives, so it seems people today would prefer to watch paint dry rather than to go see a movie. I very much enjoyed A Nightmare on Elm Street at the Leicester Square Theatre in 1985, so it was no surprise that it spawned so many sequels. I think this was the weakest of the lot, the fourth one, but I think the humour rather got a bit too humorous, but I did enjoy the humour. Maybe it was a series of films of its time, but there seemed to be a sort of general split as to which is the best sequel, with some even citing that the second film is better than the first. I don't think I agree with that, but I can see the appeal of the second film. I can remember at the time I really liked Dream Warriors, but I didn't see any of those at the cinema until Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare came along, and the 3D in this did work extremely well. It's anaglyph 3D, And I've been getting a bit confused actually as to which glasses in here came with the LaserDisc and which were the ones we got at the Odeon. But of course it's obvious when you get them out, because one of the sets of glasses from the LaserDisc is missing. That's the Freddy's Dead, and of course the First Choice Odeon logo gives away the fact that these were the ones we got at the Odeon West End. There was even a television series which I wasn't aware of. I don't know if it just went out in America or maybe in the middle of the night over here. But one day I saw this tape in one of the Cheap Jack video stores, I think on Tottenham Court Road, in the days when we had good shops on Tottenham Court Road. And so I picked this up to have a look at it. I think the first story in this was pretty good, but the second one was a sort of typical, it's got nothing to do with the Nightmare on Elm Street series, it's just Freddy Krueger introducing it. That seems to happen quite often with these sort of follow-up television spin-offs. But overall, I think it's a good series of films. I haven't yet seen Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I have to admit that by then I'd rather had enough of the series and I thought I'd take a break. So maybe that's one I've got to look forward to now that hopefully the films are coming out as 4K discs. I'm sure at the end of it, if that happens, there's going to be an enormous box set. But let's hope Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare gets the anaglyph 3D treatment on a 4K disc, because it works quite well on LaserDisc, but nowhere near as well as it did in the Odeon West End that night. The ghost faces, when they come out of the screen, it was surprising to see 3D so good with anaglyph. So that would be worth looking at on a 4K disc if indeed it happens. Now, there was a remake a few years ago which I did see on Blu-ray, but I've successfully completely erased that from my memory, so can't remember hardly anything about it, and that's because I didn't enjoy it at all and I thought it completely missed the atmosphere and what made the original such a classic. The music in here contributes enormously to the dreamlike atmosphere, and I felt when I first watched this that it was reminiscent of my own teenage years, trying to stay awake in my room to see another late night horror film on my black and white portable television. The cast, I liked all the cast, but Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger was the pièce de résistance. I thought he was amazing in the role, and that carried on throughout, even though the humour might have got a bit over the top at times. So to summarise, the 185:1 image quality is excellent, perhaps a little too good in places, as it doesn't look as scary at times because it's so clear, and the new surround sound works effectively. For the original mono sound, it needs to be turned up quite substantially compared to the volume of the new surround sound to get the best out of it. It cost me £19.99 from HMV, and if you fancy it, it might be best to get it now, because without this slipcover, I think it will feel a little lackluster. There's nothing wrong with what's contained within, of course, the 4K disc is excellent, but without that slip you might think this isn't a very good package. And I say that because while I was in FOP a few days ago in the West End of London, I picked up Twisters for £25, so £24.99 in HMV, but £25 in FOP. And I went to get that from the counter, and the lady went to get a copy from behind the counter and it came out without a slipcover, so an assistant went downstairs to find one with a slip. Now, this has only come out recently, and if they're already running out of slipcovers for this, will the same happen with A Nightmare on Elm Street? Just something worth bearing in mind if you really do fancy purchasing that one. Maybe best not to hold on, although no doubt £5 cheaper very soon, or sometime early next year. Right, I think that brings us to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to carry on creating content like this. Until the next video, bye bye for now.